Доброго дня, це медіа.
Good afternoon. This is Media Center Ukraine Odessa. We are starting the last briefing day this year. And now we are having with us Dmytro Kubryak, a released hostage of the Kremlin, who was at Azovstal in Mariupol. He is neurosurgeon and referee. He is online with us today. Dmytro, can you hear me? Yes. Good afternoon. Recently, it has been 3 months since your release. Can you tell us briefly about your rehabilitation? So rehabilitation is actually over, and in early January, I have to come back to service at Dnipro Military Hospital. So are you going to continue to work as a neurosurgeon? Yes, of course, until there is a full-scale war. I believe that every citizen of Ukraine must help our country with what he or she can do the best, and I will continue my work, of course. Are you in contact with those who are released from captivity? Do you know about those who are still hostages? Yes, of course, I follow the situation, how the POVs exchange take place. Unfortunately, they are not as frequent as we would like them to be. And of course, it does not fully depend on the Ukrainian party, on the Ukrainian side, which want to return all its citizens. But a lot of women and men that were in Mariupol with me are still held captive. To be exchanged, I moved from Olenivka on the 20th of September, and sometimes later, all the POVs from there were brought to different places. So we do not have precise data about their whereabouts, but we believe that they are on the territory of the Russian Federation, but we cannot say for sure. What was the health condition of the people who were together with you in the captivity, those people who were in Mariupol with you? Are they still wounded? And in one of the interview, you mentioned that they did not feed them enough, and all of us have seen those terrible photos of people who are released from captivity. Those who were most severely wounded are being gradually exchanged, and the first exchange was on the 29th of June, when 146 wounded were exchanged, including those military who had their hands or legs amputated. When I was released, there were no severe wounded back there. So those people did not require any intensive care, but they required rehabilitation. These were the people who had neuropathy of hands and legs. They were wounded by firearms. And that's why they were not in full functioning. This is as for the majority of the wounded back in Olenivka. And you are right saying that the main problem is malnutrition, and around 80% of the military who were still there in the captivity are really in the state of anorexia, so just bones and skin. because of the not only of lack of proper nutrition, but actually they gave us just 2-3 minutes to eat. And the convoy that was with us there in the canteen, they just ordered to stop eating, and people did not have enough time to eat what they provided. That's why people are look as they look when they are released. Other journalists and I sometimes communicate with people who are still in the captivity, and sometimes there is not enough precise information about their whereabouts. Can you recommend something to the relatives of prisoners of war, of hostages who are kept there? What they should do, how they can find forces to continue waiting for their loved ones? The first thing I can say is that they should never lose hope. And I would like to make a small example. There with me, there was a wounded serviceman. So there was the break of both hips, so he couldn't move during the whole time. The person stayed there with us because he was an amputant. And on the 21st of September, he was released. And I communicated with his wife, who said that the whole time while her husband was in the captivity, she had the information that he was killed, but she never believed that. And she did everything possible to find him. And she was successful because she found him and he was released from the captivity. And I'm sure this is not the only story that we have. That's why the relatives should not be desperate. As for the practical advice, I believe that the relatives of POWs should remember about the existence of the coordination headquarters in Kyiv for prisoners of war. And this is the whole institution that collects information, processes information, and they look for prisoners of war, and they're in constant contact with the relatives of prisoners of war. So this is the first institution the relatives of POWs should address. Are you in contact now with the servicemen of the Azovstal that you operated on? And how does he feel now? Are you in contact with him? I saw him when the report was short, and to be honest, I have not contacted with him since then because he's quite busy, and there is rehabilitation ongoing, and he's getting ready to the reconstructive surgery that with the substitution of the part of his skull. But when I communicated with him, I was actually impressed with the results he had managed to achieve. And I'm pleased, actually, with the result. Because it was 8 months ago when I operated on him, and he has almost fully recovered. So there's still some coordination disorders, lack of concentration, some issues with his memory, but generally speaking, the person has almost recovered. He feels great, and he still have some forces and some reserves for further recovery. Thank you. I have a question from my colleague from the French radio. I have one more question about the captivity. Were you able to contact to your relatives to explain that you were held captive? Did you have an opportunity to inform them about your whereabouts, and what was the attitude to you in the captivity? Thank you for your question. So that was quite bad, to put it mildly. So that was a constant psychological pressure. And they constantly told us that there is nowhere for you to return because Ukraine is almost non-existent as a state. That the territory will be divided by other states, that no one waits for us. That they told us that no one waited for us in Ukraine. And that was really very difficult from the psychological perspective. But of course, we had no doubts. We understood that Ukraine kept fighting because there was Russian artillery around Olenivka. And during 5.5 months, we heard the outcoming and incoming shooting. That's why we understood that there is no major shift on the front line. And we realized that more or less the situation was under Ukraine's control. But the most difficult thing there was inability to understand how much time we had to wait in the captivity. Because when it comes to the prisoners who are sentenced, they understand how much time they will spend at prison. But in our case, that was impossible, because we did not have any information about how much time they were going to keep us. As for physical attitude, there was once when they accepted us there. So they called it kind of a registration in quotation marks. So when we got off the bus in which they brought us to there, they beat us with batons. And as for other physical influence, physical impact, as for the tortures, they used it to those prisoners of war whom they believed guilty in some military crimes. These were the operators of artillery, snipers, tankists, and they interrogated them. And they used different kinds of tortures towards them. They used electricity to torture them. And other types of tortures. As for the possibility to contact our relatives, one time that was the representatives of FSB, as I understand, allowed us to call for several minutes to our relatives. And they told us that we should convey the following message. That our relatives should convey the messages, that they should start some rallies, that they should try to attack the president's administration for us to be released. So this means that Russians are interested in organizing this kind of rallies and protests against our current leadership of the country. So that's where their aim. So they were not trying to follow the Geneva Convention, which envisaged the possibility for prisoners of war to contact their relatives. But even in such situation, they had their own aims when they allowed us to call. And as for the norms of international humanitarian law, Geneva Convention are not followed and are not accepted by the Russian Federation, unfortunately. As for that call, as far as I understand, they just listened to your conversation with your relatives. and perhaps they were able to hear what relatives told you. Yes, they just stood beside listening. And they controlled what we were telling our relatives. But actually, we had only a few minutes. We just had enough time only to say that we were alive, but we could not tell about our whereabouts. As for your location, you were a witness of the terrorist attack in Olenivka. And did you provide any eyewitness in the framework of criminal proceedings? Did you have any information about that terrorist attack? Of course, after I was released, I communicated with our law enforcement bodies. And of course, I told them everything I remembered. But I don't know if this information will be enough to establish and identify those who were guilty. I hope that this information will be helpful, that my testimony will be helpful. But everything is clear, actually, in terms of who should be blamed for that terrorist attack. So this is just a question of additional information, some details provided with regard to what happened, what we saw from inside. Because we were involved in providing help to the members of Azov regiment. And of course, we did not have enough equipment or medication. That's why we just did everything that we could. For example, to stop the blood bleeding, just to use the tourniquet, to provide some painkillers, just to relieve the pain of those people who were injured. So, of course, that was a terrorist attack. That was the planned action, but we were impressed that it took place at 11:30 at night, but the first trucks from wounded were released from that place only at 5 o'clock in the morning after the terrorist attack. And those people who survived that, they were just lying there overnight. They were not sure if they will be provided health care in a specialized hospital, or they would just stay there dying. And the Russian administration, they were just staying near the gateway, just observing those people lying there. Moreover, they made some cynical remarks. That's why I have no doubts that that was the planned terrorist attack. And this is one more military crime in the collection of their crimes, because which is quite extensive. Thank you. We have no more questions from our journalists, but I have one. Were you invited as the neurosurgeon to come back to the front line? Will you accept such proposal after your personal experience? I were not asked to go there because I have not returned to the armed forces of Ukraine after rehabilitation, but I know for sure that there are some locations quite close to the area of hostilities where neurosurgeons are needed. And I believe, and I can say that when I joined the armed forces of Ukraine in 2020, I wanted to work at the front line, closer to the combat zone. And in February, I was able to do this. And that's why I believe that after I return to the service, I will try to find the way to get at least closer to the combat zone, to the contact line, to be as useful as possible for our army and for our soldiers, to help them as much as I can. Thank you very much. We'll final stop here. Thank you very much for your service, and I hope that when you come back to the service, you will be able to provide aid to many of our services. Thank you. Have a nice day. This was our first briefing for today. We will continue our work, and the next briefing will take place in 10 minutes. And it will be dedicated to the situation in Kherson Oblast. We will have Dmytro Kubryak with us, so stay with us.